Hey everybody, this is Chris DeFurio with Keys to the Shop. Welcome to a special series that we're going to be producing at Keys to the Shop on a very frequent basis. I'm hoping to have some new content every day addresses concerns related to COVID-19 and its impact on our businesses. This, of course, is one of the hardest times in specialty coffee retail to date. That's not putting it. That's not hyperbole. I think that's literal. We all know it's happening. It's really unbelievable that it is. And for many owners, you haven't had the time to really stop and breathe. You're just in pragmatic mode, reaction mode. And these episodes, I hope, are opportunities to gain some perspective as we share two things. There's going to be two components here. One, there's going to be topical conversations, either between you and I or with some subject matter experts. Today, we're talking with Marshall Fuss. He is a past guest on the show, episode 101, Pitfalls, Avoiding Legal Pitfalls. And as an attorney at law, he is going to be talking to us about what he would recommend his clients to do when they approach banks and landlords during this time. I think he offers some valuable insight. And of course, this is something that varies depending on your location, in your context, state by state, city by city. But this is some good general guidance that I think will kickstart some of your conversations if you haven't started those already. But this is just an example of one of those topical conversations. So that's one. Two, we're going to be talking with other owners. Got a lot of people lined up to join us on the show to talk about their story, about what they've gone through in this current crisis, how they've pivoted their models of their businesses, and what they would suggest for other owners in this time, not only for business, but also with relationships. And we're going to talk about communication with your staff. We're going to talk business models, all of that with these folks. And it's going to be kind of like constant Founder Friday in that respect. And so I'm excited to start this. If there's a subject that you really want to know about, please email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. We'll see what we can do to address your concern, or at least point you in the right direction to get more information about that. Keys to the Shop is all about helping equip you for success, not just in times where things are going well, but in times exactly like this. And your feedback to me will help keep things relevant. And so with that, I want to get to our conversation with Marshall, and here we go. Well, Marshall, welcome back to Keys to the Shop. I'm really excited to talk to you about all that's going on here today.
Glad to talk to you, Chris. I'm glad to be back.
This is obviously, it's maybe trite at this point to say it's an unprecedented time, but it is, every moment things seem to be changing, and businesses are struggling for survival, and it seems more and more it's not, our agility that's called into question. It's what kind of legal recourse do we have? What are our restrictions? What are our freedoms in our shops? And so I'm hoping that we can, have that discussion today and guide people to some, resource, or just kind of, help people understand the situation just a little bit better, because it's not easy no matter what. At the end of this conversation, obviously, we're not going to have a ton of just 1, 2, 3 steps to success. But I guess we can start off on a positive note. Before we were recording here, you were mentioning the federal clarifications for essential services. I think that's helpful for a lot of people to know about, and maybe they haven't been updated on that. Can you kind of dive into what that is and how that impacts coffee bars and coffee roasteries?
Sure, Chris. On March 19, which in coronavirus terms is about 10 years ago, but on March 19, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security issued a memorandum, which they called Memorandum on Identification of Essential Critical Infrastructure Workers during the COVID-19 response. And guess what? Much of what coffee workers do is considered by them to be critical infrastructure. So they specifically call out among the critical workers are, let me pull this up. Okay. Workers supporting groceries, pharmacies, and other retail that sells food and beverage products. And thank you very much, but coffee is a beverage. Also, restaurant carryout and quick serve food operations, and carryout and delivery food employees. So there we go again for coffee shops. And finally, food manufacturer employees and their supplier employees, to include those employed in food processing. And roasting coffee is food processing. So that's the good news. At least the federal government, their guidelines consider many coffee industry employees to be critical infrastructure workers. However, they do say this document gives guidance, and they intend it to be helpful to state and local governments in defining what they consider essential critical infrastructure workers. So you still need to look to what is happening in your state, your county, and your town or city for how closely they're following this and how they're interpreting it. This is not a definitive document. So as disturbing as it can be to stay up to date on the news these days, you do need to stay up to date on the news to know what you can do.
Okay, so it's general guidance that local authorities and your governor, et cetera, are going to interpret and maybe interpret differently. So some states are going to have a little bit more of a strict interpretation of that, and it seems as though maybe the strict interpretations are first going to impact the coffee shop, the retail expression of the coffee shop, before it impacts the roaster.
Yes, and they already have. I mean, in my cities, which are Los Angeles and Pasadena, they sit-down service is already prohibited, and only takeout is allowed. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're a coffee shop owner. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but Nick Cho has posted a makeshift takeout window that he installed in his at the front of his sidewalk coffee shop, Wrecking Ball, in San Francisco. And I know other shops are copying it around the country. So if you happen to be lucky enough to have a shop that's located in a pedestrian-friendly urban area, this may work for you and help you keep going.
It seems a lot of people are glued to Instagram and social media to get those kind of ideas and to figure out how to adjust their model so that they're within the guidelines and able to also still serve their customers. And so, yeah, that's very helpful to know. And I know so many people are trying to figure out how to survive and may not be aware that they're allowed to do certain things. And the conversation also is, of course, it's up to the owner to decide whether or not they want to stay open if it imposes a risk in their mind to their customers or their staff. But it's allowable under the law to do those things, to have takeaway and to adjust your business to be within those guidelines.
Absolutely.
So now when we're talking, let's say we're in a situation where we've already adjusted our model of our coffee bar to fit within those guidelines. Say it's like Nick Cho's pickup window. Other people are doing a lot of curbside ordering and online ordering and things like that. Still, we're making far less. For most people, I'd say. There are some people saying that, an initial weekend like this past weekend, there's a lot of people posting that they had record numbers, but I imagine that's just temporary as people are stocking up for, even stricter orders. Most people are down by 75, even 80% of their revenue, and they're just struggling to make rent. And I wanted to explore a little bit of what people could do potentially that would alleviate that pressure in rent. Like, what kind of recourse do people have to get some extra time from their landlord? What kind of things would you suggest people do to stay in their space longer amidst having such a lower amount of income?
Well, first of all, there's good news. So far I know in many, several California cities, here in Los Angeles, for example, there is a 3-month moratorium on commercial evictions. So even you have actually the ability to not pay any rent at all for 3 months and not get evicted. So that's a lot of leverage.
Mm-hmm.
And that was by order of our mayor. And I expect many, but not all jurisdictions will follow suit. However, this isn't rent forgiveness, it's really rent postponement. So, for example, in our mayor's order here, when the order is lifted, you will have 3 months to pay back the rent that you didn't pay. So if you may be faced with if you in fact have given yourself a much needed 3-month rent holiday, when the holiday is over, you may be facing 3 months of double rent, and can you pay that? So even if you have, even if you're fortunate enough to live in a jurisdiction where you have a moratorium like this, you still have to think ahead to how you'll handle it at the back end. So my first advice was whether you're in one of these rent holiday, I shouldn't say rent holiday, but eviction holiday jurisdictions, whether you are or are not, don't stick your head in the sand and hope it'll go away and your landlord won't notice. If you can't pay your rent, your landlord will notice. And it's important to remember that your landlord is not just a money machine that gobbles up your money for rent. Your landlord is also running a business, and your landlord in most cases has to make monthly payments on a mortgage and has to pay for maintenance. So your landlord is also under pressure, and you need to be in touch with your landlord sooner and not later, so that your landlord knows where you stand, the landlord knows what you're thinking about, and the landlord can talk intelligently to the landlord's lender about what sort of relief your landlord will get. At this point, I know that the federal government and some state governments are looking at mortgage payment relief as well as rent payment relief or eviction relief, but these developments are ongoing day by day. We're talking, Chris, you and I, on March 23rd, and I don't know when this is going to be released as a podcast, but as of today, Republicans and Democrats are still at loggerheads in Washington over what their coronavirus relief package is going to look at. So I would say stay on top of the news, but not so much on top of it that you get obsessed with it and fall into a deep depression. You want to know enough to protect yourself. And I would say keep your lines of communication open with your landlord.
It's true, I suppose, that your landlord has more flexibility and maybe is a little bit more has a little bit more cash on hand to be able to just without an order from the federal government or state government or whatever, um, give you some leeway in your rent, to tack it onto the end of your lease and things like that. So, like, don't necessarily, would you say, like, don't necessarily wait for a mandate from the government to force your landlord to do something. Your landlord might want to do something just in their own, in the relationship between you and them.
Yes. Landlords are not in the business of owning empty spaces. They and they know full well that if you close up and leave as of this date, they probably have very few takers for your empty space. So your landlord wants to keep you involved. The landlord will probably want some commitment that you're going to stay with them. And the same thing goes on the lender's side. Remember, I talked about how the landlord's in the middle. The banks and other lenders, they're in the business of lending money and collecting interest. They are not in the business of owning and managing property. They went through that in 2009, and it wasn't a pleasant experience. So I expect some kind of relief is going to come out of Washington, that for people who are paying mortgages and for the lenders who hold those mortgages. But all of those gears have to get into place and start working for the coffee shop owner to have the relief they need, be able to resume their business when this is over, and for the economy to get back on its feet.
Well, it sounds like the mindset here is to act with urgency and with knowledge, but also with the idea that this is going to need to be a win-win in terms of, these are just not entities that want to, eat your lunch necessarily. Like you were mentioning, they don't want to have this property that doesn't make them money, and they want to get a return on their investment. So, but I think that sometimes we can think of it as just a bygone conclusion that I have no recourse. I can't talk to them because they won't listen, when in fact they may really just, maybe they're so busy with everything that they're not going to reach out to you specifically, and you have to do that work to get into their office. And when you're there, if you're talking about lenders and banks, for example, what kind of things can or should owners prepare to present, and how should they approach their lenders in order to get some leeway, some grace?
Okay, so you're talking not about real estate mortgages, you're talking about business loans that shop
Things
owners
like that,
have.
yeah.
Yes, same thing. Be proactive. Contact the bank now. They know you're in trouble. And you're not their only customer that has this problem. So they are probably still developing their own policies on this. They're still waiting for action from federal and state government. But let them know that you want to work with them, and that you hope that they'll be flexible. And I think you'll find most of them will extend some kind of flexibility. They don't want a bunch of defaulted loans. They don't want to own a warehouse full of espresso machines from defaulting borrowers. They want to keep that cash flow coming of loan payments when this is over. So people may have a longer term mindset than you might think they do. They are looking for what their business will look like a year from now, and the banks are looking for what will their business look like a year from now. So I would say, again, reach out. They may not have an answer for you right now, but at least don't act like don't get hysterical when you talk to them. Just let them know you're taking a serious look at your business and how this has affected them, and that you hope you can work with your lender on a solution that works for both of you in the long term.
Do you think that due diligence will sort of engender a better feeling of saying, well, yes, we will, because it looks like you're really prepared and you have a good handle on what's going on, rather than just, coming in there and freaking out like you said?
Yeah, absolutely. You'll sound like a responsible business person, and not. You don't. You definitely don't want to come off as a chicken with its head cut off.
Right. So because so much of it's their confidence in your abilities, right? I mean, that's why they lent you the money in the first place, and why you put your business plan together the way you did is because you want them to view you that way.
They may even want to see, and I know it's almost ridiculous to ask for, but they may even want to see your financial plan for how you come out of this. Mm-hmm. Frankly, I don't know how you would do that, how anyone would do that at this point, but they may ask for something like that. And if it makes them feel more comfortable to see a piece of paper with a plan, or a spreadsheet with a plan, by all means, come up with something.
It's a rare person that would have the forethought to put together such an in-depth emergency plan. I know there are some people out there who probably have, like one out of 2,000 chops, a pandemic, plan for their coffee shop. But it seems like, and I've said this on the show before, we pivot often in specialty coffee because we're kind of scrappy with the way that we start our coffee shops, and we're trained somewhat to respond in a pragmatic way to challenges. And so I bet you probably would surprise yourself in how quickly you could put together a plan on paper, and how that's better than just trying to think of something. At least it's on paper. Just like they say, goal setting is better when it's written down. Like, you have a plan, it's probably better than nothing.
Yes, and it also help you make those really tough decisions about how many employees can I keep on staff? Mm-hmm. How many do I have to furlough? When might I be able to bring them back? And your staff is scared to death right now. Yeah. I can tell you my own family. My nephew is a coffee shop manager, and he was just laid off with 2 weeks severance pay. And he works for a company that has huge financial backing behind it. So if your baristas and your shift managers and your other staff are seeing big name coffee shops shutting down and laying off their employees, you can bet if you have a small shop, they're very, very concerned for their jobs. So this is probably redundant for any responsible shop owner, but you probably have already done this. But please sit down with your employees and let them know you are thinking about them and you're trying to work out a solution that winds up with your shop still being in business and them having a job, if not for the time being, at least a job they might come back to.
Yeah, that's a common refrain that I'm hearing as it's just like a pile up on the highway of coffee shops, and no one's immune, where they're shutting their shops down, and they're saying that hopefully they can welcome their employees back. And the reason they're shutting down is because they want to be able to, is essentially just stop the bleeding and have a place to welcome these people back. But like you say, sit down and talk with them, and it sounds like we really do need to be transparent about exactly why we have to shut down and what's behind it. Like, what's what are the financials, and why does it make sense? Because that could really be misunderstood by employees if you just say, well, we're going to have to close down. I'm sorry, things are tough. It has to be a little bit more nuanced than that.
Yes. We all have to be kinder to each other.
Yeah. So a question that comes to mind when we're talking about getting grace from lenders, talking with your landlord, we're talking about basically negotiating with them, and I think about the people that just opened, brand new businesses that are already wondering, like, okay, maybe we're only a few months in, maybe it's only a year in, and we're not through paying that loan by a long shot. There's probably a lot of trepidation that comes with being new, as opposed to like 10 years, good relationship with your landlord, the bank lends you money for your third shop. Is there any kind of, what's the difference between, how a new owner approaches a bank or a landlord versus somebody who's just got a really good long-term relationship with these folks? Is there any advice that you would give to new owners that would help them out?
Well, you partly said it there, Chris. Relationships are important, and lenders are more likely to be flexible with customers they have long-term relationships with, because they want to keep them going in the future. So I don't have a lot hopeful there to say. The newer shop owner is certainly going to be more vulnerable financially from the standpoint of their own resources and from the standpoint of how well their lenders are willing to work with them. It's just a fact of life.
Mm-hmm. So what we were talking about before, doing the plan for how to come out of this and all the due diligence that comes with that seems more important, especially for that person who doesn't have that long-term relationship. Because if you're a bank and you've been working with the same person at the bank and they see you thriving, that's the proof right there that you know how to run a great business. But otherwise, they need to know that you're preemptively maybe a little ahead of the curve in predicting how you can get revenue to make good on that loan.
Absolutely. As much as you can, you want to your bank to build up confidence in your bank. Have your bank believe that you will come out of this able to reopen your business if you've closed it, and their number one is be able to repay your loan.
So now we need to be vigilant, obviously, and we need to have our eye on what's happening now. Generally speaking, as we wrap up here, what would you say we need to be focused on right now that's going to be our best bet in kind of surviving and thriving? We'd want to do both ideally, but just getting through this with our shops, right now. And then what about the future? Because stuff like this changes the nature of retail and the legal relationships between, you and the bank and you and your landlord, et cetera. Like people that have business plans in the works right now that we're about to ask for money to open a coffee bar. Like how are we gonna, how should we be prepared for things to change in the future? And what should we be focused on right now?
Well, part of the business uncertainty comes from the epidemiology uncertainty. We talk in terms of a few weeks or a few months, but in fact, some epidemiologists say this will go on for a year or more, or that it may ebb and flow. We will have peaks and curves, peaks and valleys in terms of the infections, and we have not gotten anywhere near the crisis stage on this. As we speak, a Navy hospital ship is on its way to Los Angeles Harbor, where it will dock and become a hospital for the Los Angeles metropolitan area. And guess what? No, it's not going to serve coronavirus patients. It's for all the regular hospital patients who are going to be pushed out of hospitals because the hospitals are full of coronavirus patients. So It's probably premature to make much long-term planning because we just don't know. We don't know what the future. We hope this will be over in 2 or 3 months, or at least it will be reasonably subsided in 2 or 3 months, but we really don't know. And if I were making plans, I think I'd put them on hold for a while. Not the most optimistic thing to say, I know, but if a client came into me and said, I have a pile of cash and I'm thinking of opening a business next month, I'd say probably not the best time. But 4 months from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, maybe. People have different abilities to take risk, and I'm sure there will be opportunities for people who have money set aside to snap up properties, businesses that weren't able to survive.
So as grim as that sounds,
I'm sorry, I wasn't cheery again.
I think cheery is fine as long as it's based in reality. I tend to be an optimist. My wife says that I'm a dreamer, and she says she's a realist. And sometimes I tell her, well, I think that sometimes is pessimism. But we need realism right now because it's better to face it and be wise. And certainly there are people who, in 2008, for example, I know of people who started their business in 2008. Maybe if you're opening just a drive-through at this point, because that's what we're all converting to.
The president is pushing to get people back into businesses in 15 days. So,
well,
if you're an optimist, you can listen to our president.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Right now, as we are trying to decide what to do, where should we be focused on?
I'd be focusing on the news, what government relief is coming. I'd be focused on staying in communication with landlords and lenders, and I'd be looking to conserve cash.
I mean, at this point, people are cutting labor to do that, and
unfortunately,
yeah.
Anything you can do to keep them going, keep the business going, keep some revenue coming to them. I know people have been doing virtual tip jars and other things, but you can't run a business that has no money coming in and only expenses going out for an indefinite amount of time. For a little bit of time, yes, not an indefinite amount of time.
Well, Marshall, thank you for joining us on the show and talking to me about these things. I know it really is. I think it's frustrating to not be able to identify exactly what's going to, get us out of this thing because nobody has that answer.
No one.
It's just we need to talk about these things and be pointed in the direction where there is light in this direction. And that's the best we can hope for in this time, I think. And I think it's been helpful to talk about it.
It's been my honor and my pleasure, Chris. And I wish everyone the best of luck.
Thank you so much for joining me on this first episode of our COVID-19 focused series. I hope to see you back on further episodes. Stay tuned to Keys to the Shop as we publish those, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. I hope you all stay safe, and I'll see you here on the next episode on this series, From Keys to the Shop.